Welcome, everybody. This is the Catalyzing the Future Catalyzing Conversations series, and my name is Todd Nilsson. I am happy to be here today with a friend, David Cushman, who was one of the participants at the Catalyzing the Future event that was held on September the 30th this year. David, I'm having a little bit of a lag in my stream. Can you see me?
I can see you, but yeah, I'm not seeing your lips move in sync with what you're saying.
This seems to happen to me on StreamYard quite a bit, so hopefully it'll clear up here rather soon. But as long as we're both on the screen here and we can be seen, I think life is good.
I think you've caught up now. Yeah,
I just came back in. Excellent. Yeah. Great. So David, I know you were formerly a digital strategy leader with Cognizant. You're currently the owner of Faster Future Consulting. You're an author, blogger, former journalist, digital pioneer. I mean, you've been in this space for a while. Like me, but you've accomplished much more. So, really glad to meet you. Thanks for agreeing to come on to the conversation here.
Thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure. Always good to connect and always good to speak to new audiences. As you say, I've been knocking around this world for a few years. I think my first digital experiences were around 98, 99. I started probably my first blog around then. I used to work in motorcycle journalism.
Oh, yeah.
I think the first blog I set up was for ownership of a Suzuki Hayabusa, which must have been 98, 99. That came out in 99, I think. And it was the world's fastest motorcycle at the time. Wow. So I set up a blog, and so other owners could talk to me because I was then writing about it in print. So it was a way in which I could connect with a very niche group of people on a global scale. And I saw that as well, and saw that kind of an early generosity of spirit that we enjoyed with the early web. When I wrote a blog also about I got married in Sri Lanka, and someone got in touch with me who lives in Thailand, who wanted to get married at the hotel I got married at in Sri Lanka, and found it easier to communicate with me via my blog about it than it was to contact the hotel in question to get it booked. So and that kind of led to an offer of a place in his flat in Bangkok when we were over there. So it was that initial connecting people around what they believed in, a kind of idea of the web creating a purpose, but also the web creating a way in which we could come together to create communities around things that we cared about to then create value. Because it was all very well having a nice conversation about it, but then what happens next? And so you had this idea of, if I can have a conversation with other people, that's the start point. It has to be around something I care about, because that's the reason I'm joining in this conversation. But then there's that, okay, what can we do together as a result? And then we started seeing really strong examples of that with things like the cleanup after the London riots back in, I don't know, I'm guessing 2007, 2008, where that was completely organised by people who cared around a hashtag on Twitter. It wasn't government organised, it wasn't government sanctioned. No one said go out on the streets with a brush and tidy up. In fact, if that had been communicated centrally, I suspect no one would have bothered. But because it came from people who cared about it, and they've found a way to talk to each other around a shared purpose, they then acted on it to create value. And I think for me that's been a really important part of the web, a part of the opportunity that the web offers us, which maybe we're being forced to rediscover again because we now live in such distributed and disaggregated lives. It was a promise that I think the big platforms failed to live up to. They failed to organise around value. they're still selling ads. It's a simple, very dull model. Now, they think they're smart if they can convince those marginal few people who can be convinced to purchase something. It's really, in my view, a real wasted opportunity of the connectivity that we have through the web.
Yeah, I certainly I was growing up in the digital realm around the same time as you, and I remember that early sense of promise and excitement about the web and sort of the wide open spaces. And suddenly in recent years we found ourselves in these walled garden kinds of platforms that are kind of Mickey Mousing the I don't know if that's a good word for it, but the experience is very protected, curated, sanitized.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's part of the whole challenge that, and don't get me wrong, I like things to be easy, and cognitively as humans we like to use as little brain energy as possible, but I think that's a bit exploited in some of the models that we've ended up with. The whole idea of "don't make me think." Is that a good thing? If I've stopped thinking, have I stopped engaging? Actually, at that point, and I'm simply just clicking my way through life. Yes, okay, that might result in me getting a delivery in 1 hour, but I've completely lost connection with what it takes to make that delivery, let alone what it takes to make that product. So I do get concerned that we've oversimplified the experience for people, and that in many ways is a way in which we can, but by oversimplifying that, we're oversimplifying or under-challenging ourselves in what we could otherwise be doing. We become recipients. It's almost back to the idea of the information superhighway, this idea that this broadcast mechanic of the web, that it's become an entertainment medium that you're just observing rather than engaging in. That for me is where we are still quite broken. And it's evidenced in the upload and download speeds that most of us enjoy. It's really skewed to broadcast rather than participation.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I professionally, my work is within the space of online community building and sort of that world. And the challenges of that are palpable. Everybody tends to think of social media as community, but that's not really a community, is it? It's only a community if there's people who are in a group or outside of a group, that if there's some clear lines. And trying to find ways to bring those people together and fulfill those clear interests that they have in that space. It's challenging to build those platforms and get them to start communicating with each other.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, we would just organize around an idea, and the idea was enough to attract sufficient people who cared about it enough, who then worked out that they wanted to change what they were discovering. I recall, I remember I was early days of social media. I think the UK government was asking the business I was working for to come up with a way of distributing their guidelines for how parents should pick their kindergarten, their nursery education. And what was interesting about that was that they still thought that they should come up with the rules. Here's the guidance that we should, and now use this social media stuff to distribute it for us. Well, why don't you try asking the people for whom it's intended what they think should be in those rules, and set up a community for a discussion of that. Now, if you do that, you then run the risk of finding that there's people who care enough about the current situation that they want to make it better, and then they will act to make it better. So in the case of that, I think it was certainly true at the time that people spent more time choosing their next car than they did choosing what kindergarten they sent their kids to. There's, is that a right balance? Should we be putting more effort into finding a bit more about
Right.
those kind of organisations? I see that Sias is arriving.
Yeah.
Todd, if you want to bring him in.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to bring him in here. Sai, welcome to the stream.
Hello.
Hey.
It's a forgive me for being late or just joining. It's always a privilege to listen to David and Todd, by all means.
Well, thanks, Sai. For those of you just joining us, Sai is the founder or the originator of the Catalyzing the Future event, and I'm glad you're able to come in and join us here today. David and I were just I don't know how to put it, reminiscing a bit about the way the web used to be.
Yeah.
And thinking a little bit about how people engage in these sorts of online environments. I guess the question I was leading up to was these kinds of observations you've been making about sort of the changes in the web. Is that what led you to the book, the 10 Principles of Open Business? I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the inspiration behind that.
I mean, somewhat. I think it was actually based in a world of. I believed that being open is better than being closed. That's a simple premise that sharing stuff, there's more good people than bad, there's more positive than negative out there. So the more you can connect, the better, because ultimately the openness of the web will drown out the darkness of it. So that was kind of the guts of the idea. Also, a lovely moment that I was with the guy who designed the front cover of my previous book, which was just The Power of the Network, was the previous one. And we were sat in a London pub one day, and you've got to bear in mind that he splits his life between Shanghai and rural India. He's an artist and an ex-Vietnam vet as well. And we're sat in this London pub eating pie. And he said to me, what do you think the web is for? What do you think the internet's for? Or what does it tell us about ourselves, may have been the question. And I said something like, I think it just reveals how connected we've always been. And he leapt out of his seat. That's it. That's exactly what it does. And that was kind of my understanding of the web, is that it was this wonderful way in which we could actually be the connected species that we are. And we've done a lot to disrupt that and to break it down by ideas like nation states and even companies and families. And they're all kind of silos that separate us rather than bring us together. And the web was a way in which we could actually reorganize. And that self-organizing principle I thought was really interesting, because how we organize is the fundamental building block of an economy. And it's been cheaper to organize economically in companies and in nation states, etc., etc. That works. But if you enter a world in which you can, and we were talking earlier about, people aggregating around an idea, we had the potential to create a world in which the nation doesn't matter anymore. It's whether the people who hold a shared belief, wherever they are on the planet, and connect them. And I even remember talking to some very senior politicians about this, who were also similarly concerned that the web might be revealing to us ways in which we could get rid of the traditional major parties and actually organize around things that we cared about, as maybe smaller groups, but on international levels. And that idea of being able to connect around purpose is core to the book. Chapter 1 is purpose in the book. And then there's the whole notions of how do you share stuff as a business, open data as a principle, open capital is in there as a principle as well. So if you're going to raise funds, it would be good if people who might buy it might be involved in raising those funds, and you might therefore have a proof point that this was a good idea that other people wanted to support. But the transparency, because the web was enabling us to see what's companies might like to have hidden in the past. It was all getting revealed. And this idea of surveillance rather than surveillance. We could look back and we could report. We all had the technology to start sharing what we discovered, and it makes the whole planet and everything everyone does more transparent. So there's principles like that involved, and if you think of those principles actually that if you're platform thinking and you're purpose led, that kind of approach is what's built many of the more successful businesses of the last 20 years. And the other part of it, there's a key chapter on customer-led. I talk about customer-led rather than customer-centric, where you're making partners of your customer, and therefore you have their best interests at heart. It's a partnership. And those companies, again, that have taken that, really, it's not just CX, customer experience, as a thing that sits on the side, or even a thing that you'd like to improve someday. It's CX is the thing that drives the business. It's the greatest expression of that is Amazon's customer obsession focus. Now, they may be a very process-led organization, which might lead to its own problems in the long run. But as a concept and as a way of working, the idea of putting your customer at the heart of the business is a really important one. And the insight that you could get from the web about your customer was also exploding at that same time. So why would you close your door to this bounty? And then if you're getting into co-creation because you've got a platform of things that people care about, well, why wouldn't you want to work with, that's an open innovation proposition, why wouldn't you want to work with everyone whose ideas that might work to help you shape a better fit with end user need? And so for me, this was held out an opportunity to create almost the perfect fit between the complex adaptive system of the environment and the economy to that kind of complex landscape and need and services to deliver against it. Because no longer do you need to go, I'm going to build this one-size-fits-all solution and I'm going to bludgeon the hell out of it with advertising until people buy it. You can actually create things that are on a global niche scale, effective enough, economically viable, to meet the specific needs of people. And that's, again, something that I thought was really valuable that the web enabled. And I still feel somewhat, I wrote a piece at the beginning of 2020, scarily enough, called 2020, You Disappoint Me. It's disappointed me in more ways than one now, but at the beginning of the year, I just felt we hadn't lived up to the promise that the web still offers us, but large-scale industry has, by dint of sucking capital to the centre more and more and more, been able to control.
Well, I mean, I think what you're describing is, I think to some parties like nation states and large organizations, the web is this potentially anarchic thing. And they've been able to, I think fear is a factor that's prevented so many of them from saying, like, why aren't we doing more customer-led kinds of efforts? Why aren't we, embracing some of the tools that are here? They're just simply, not taking advantage of things that are right in front of their faces. It's been a frustration for me for years. I mean, we've had all sorts of crowdsourcing, capable tools for 10, 15 years now. Yeah. And there's organizations and executive leaders who are just waking up to the fact that, we could do this digitally. What are you talking about?
Yeah. It's a challenge, the whole trying to be creative in a distributed environment. It is difficult. I think we're very productive in this whole working from home space. It's much harder to be creative. And I think what we haven't done is virtualize the experience of the office or the workshop. We've simply replicated with digital means. It's not the same. But there's some hope for that. I think just the notion of smart 5G and Internet of Things and the virtual reality power that 5G will deliver to us it could mean that it will feel like you are in the room or feel like you are actually face to face with the other human, and that kind of micro muscle movement. And we saw earlier, Todd, what a challenge that was in delays.
Yes.
That is, it's such a core part of how we communicate with each other and how we express ideas. That makes up 70 to 80% of our language, and we're losing that through the screen at the moment. Mm-hmm. I don't even know, for example, whether how we smell makes a difference to how we understand each other. I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because it seems like quite a strong sense, and we have none of that at all. You have no idea how long I've been wearing this T-shirt.
I think that's what I'm going to use as our headline. There we go. So I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I'm sure Sai's got some questions here too. But one thing that's kind of a top of mind for me that and then I'll cede the floor to Sai to ask some questions here is now that we are in 2020, disappointing as it is, there are still people thinking of starting businesses, or obviously there are businesses in motion, with what's here today. How are you advising organizations that are thinking about starting a business this year, is there anything different that they should be doing or thinking about than say a year ago?
I suppose one positive is the innovation risk is very low. You've got nothing to lose in this environment, so why not have a crack? And I think my personal take on where we are as a market is that we're clearing the backlog at the moment. So we're cracking through all the stuff that we knew we needed to do. And we've known we've needed to do for maybe 10 years. And so all of a sudden there's this kind of rapid catch up. So if you're in the world of making stuff, and that maybe digitally making stuff, if you're a coder or you can actually deploy the tech, game on. That's a real fast market right now. The other end is, can you sell that stuff? There's an awful lot of people trying to sell what they're making. And a lot of investment and effort in that. So how can you improve the way in which you can sell to people? And God knows we've seen enough failure in that for the last 20 years, and people not really understanding that it's not how big your advert is, it's what the product is fundamentally makes a difference. But then there's this bit in the middle which I think might kick in maybe 6 months' time, which is, what is it that we should make next? And that space, that kind of insight to innovation strategy space, I think is less in demand at the moment. And I think that's a difficult space to be launching something new into because of this backlog clearance. Now, of course, once people realize that the context has changed for which they built all that stuff, so the backlog was for an old context, and it's being rushed through. As you know, people are going, oh, we're doing 10 years of innovation in 5 minutes. No, you're not. You're clearing your backlog. You're not actually innovating forward at all. You're actually innovating backwards, because what you're doing is delivering against a certain set of needs and contexts that are now out of date. Things have moved on. I think we have to accept that the status quo is here with us for some time. This is a new status quo. It's not somewhere we're going to bounce back from, bounce forward from. It's just, this is it for now. So live with this, and therefore the products and services need to be designed for the space we're now in, rather than the space we were in. And so as soon as, the first thing, of course, will be spend more money trying to sell the thing that is built for the wrong market, because of course you're not building it wrong. The first thing to do is spend more money on selling it. But then there'll come that realization of, okay, maybe it's the product, and maybe we need to go back and ask that question again of what should we make next? Then that space for the insight to innovation and strategy work, I think, comes back. But my guess is you're 6 months away from that at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Sai, my apologies for hogging the floor. You look thoughtful. Did you have some ideas you wanted to bounce off of David with this?
Definitely, and no apology needed. I thirst for time with David, and I've mentioned that to David directly, by all means. David, you mentioned a keyword revealing as I joined the conversation, and the internet really revealing around what we should organize around very explicitly. What is COVID now really revealing in this experience, this time that we're in, really beginning to reveal for us, would you say, David?
I think, like all context shocks, you get things that were in the system anyway. So this notion that we can work from home, that was in the system anyway. And that's why the technology was sitting there waiting for it. We knew that was going to happen. Just as when Kennedy said, let's put a man on the moon, all the tech was in place, right? So it wasn't that big a leap to be able to make that a reality in that decade. So we've gone through that. We're now getting to this point where I think there's a mourning process that has to be gone through. Mm-hmm. So what is being revealed is that there's lots of things about the old way we lived that we liked and that we're missing. And we have to accept first that it is gone. So if you look at a traditional mourning process, I think we're just about getting angry about it now. Mm-hmm. We've been in denial, and now we're getting quite angry, and we're blaming people. And that's what I worry about for the near term, is that there'll be a bit of lashing out and anger about whose fault this is or that is. Mm-hmm. And only after we've gone through it all and we get to that acceptance point will we be able to move on. And the acceptance has to be of the new status, but also of what got us here. And that, I think, is interesting, because I do see, we saw it a little bit in the first kind of lockdown phase, because we saw impact on sustainability. We saw on the environment improving, and we started wandering again and being out in nature ourselves and taking those long country walks. And I was seeing wildlife I hadn't seen in daytime for years. And so that revelation, or as I say, acceptance, once we've got through this cycle of anger, is where we have to get to. How we get to that is one of the challenges. I don't think we can force the world forwards together to do that. Some of us have accepted that and are starting to make plans based on that. And I think a lot of the focus has to be on, okay, this COVID thing happened because of our use of the planet. Mm-hmm. And we all have a collective role in that. So if we don't want to have this kind of context shock coming up with increased regularity, and we're talking what was a black swan becoming something that's going to happen every 5 years, maybe less, we have to change our behaviour significantly and have to change what it is we call success quite critically. So I think it's that, for me, has been a learning that all of a sudden there's a break on traditional ways in which we have measured success in the West, at least. This whole idea of GDP and how much salary did you make this year and how much versus last year and what's the profit margin going forward. It's a different set of measures that we need to set for ourselves, which are about impact and happiness. And you know what? People weren't less happy 20 years ago. In fact, people were, if you look at the data, people in the 1950s and 60s, before they had quite as much of everything, were happier. Yeah. So what have we gained? Because the worst that's going to happen is that in an economic reset, we go back 10, 20 years. Yeah. That's the worst. So that just means we've got less of everything, but maybe more time for each other. Because the other thing that the web did to us was, instead of giving us extra time, which is what all the innovation from the 1950s to the 1970s did, the washing machines and the dryers and all the kind of convenience things that helped give us our lives back. Mm-hmm. We've turned that on its head, and we've made it an information superhighway, entertainment, blasting at us. Time, what do I do when I've got nothing else to do? I look at my phone. Right, so it's eaten all of our time. And it's part of this easy, stopping me think, you do worry. You could be really cynical about it and think someone's got a plan here, but we all have to collectively take our own personal stance on this. Even I've been talking to some friends about how we can tackle the big sustainability question, because it's big, scary. Oh God, how can I make any difference to that as my small individual thing? I think you start thinking about, how do I gamify it? How do I make it look like, okay, I've made a little bit of effort this week, but collectively over 6 months, it's a lot of effort. And I can see that converts to not just a carbon footprint change, but I've saved 6 dolphins this week. I don't know, whatever, it actually turns into something quite visceral. And then you could look at it from groups of people that you work with or live with, or get competitive about it and have your town versus the next town and your nation versus the next nation. And then you are seeing a significant impact of everyone's small actions. I mean, little things like committing to have 1 vegetarian meal a week. If you did that, and you log that, and you get a score for that, and that saves you half a dolphin, and over time you save 3 dolphins. And those kind of big, significant activities that you can just really make a difference to just by making little, small, incremental, tiny differences. I'm going to turn off all the lights tonight. Great, okay, that's 3 points for you, half a dolphin. We have to find our own ways, but also there are ways in which we can, as guys who've been around digital a while, think about solutions for others as well, that we can encourage others to join in.
It's an amazing idea. I'm really keen on the use of big data and Internet of Things for the purposes of good, for a change. Because I mean, as you said, sort of with the moonshot, I mean, the technology's here to do this. We have the capabilities of quantifying, how we can do good. So I know, like, for example, we have solar at our home, and those collectors, we get a report every week or every month that says you've offset the carbon and saved this many trees. Just as you said, how many dolphins have you saved? Like, I want that for all of the elements of my life, so I can start to track those kinds of things and what kind of good I'm doing. And then I love that idea of sort of pitting nation states against each other to say, okay, which one is doing the most to save the planet right now? Who's going to be winning that game? I mean, that sort of game thinking, I think, is a powerful driver of motivation, and we don't harness it often enough.
The other bit, I think, I don't see enough work on. I think there's a lot of work in supply chain with sustainability. I don't think there's so much in product design. So how do I design in sustainability at every iteration of the making of a product, service, experience, etc.? And that's because you do that with customer. You get your customer insight and you say, well, does the customer like this? Does the customer need it? And you're asking it throughout, and you're showing them. What's the equivalent for sustainability? So it could be that we need scientific data in consumable form that answers a business question for each iteration at the kind of speed that people are developing new products and services at today. And then that way we design in sustainability, design in planet positivity. It has to, in the same way as you create a great outcome for a customer, it has to be a beneficial outcome for the customer. So it should be a beneficial outcome for the planet. And if it's not, then why would it be a product that a customer would want to buy because they live on this planet? And also, you don't have a sustainable business if you don't have a place to sell it in, that kind of simple stuff. So I think that's an area that we will see work on. I've seen ways in which you can do that from a insight point of view, from a human insight point of view. But the next challenge is, how do you turn that scientific data into insight for business decision making in the product process?
David, do you think exactly as you said about the internet emerging, and in many ways the emergence of the internet was an existential crisis for some organizations? here with COVID, it's a broader existential crisis that we can't avoid beyond business, etc. Every aspect of society and our lives. From your perspective and the interactions that you've been having with leaders and what have you, is this getting through? Is this, if you will, existential crisis revealing enough that it's penetrating the mindset for longer term change?
Not yet. I'd say it's driven very short-term reactive thinking, i.e., oh look, we can get by without a travel budget. That kind of stuff's going on. Yeah, definitely happening. But there is still, I note today in the UK, we're well into our second wave, and we're having new forms of interesting lockdowns imposed or agreed in different parts of the country. There's still this notion that we are doing things to save the economy. I think it won't have landed until people realise that the economy is there to save us, and that we need to find a better measure of what success looks like. So the whole idea of the economy being to deliver a strong GDP is just missing the point. And it's actually a relatively new idea. This thing's only been around since the end of the Second World War. GDP is not once and for all measure of success for economies, but it's become a really powerful way in which every country thinks it's succeeding or not succeeding based on this weird number. So I'd like to hear in the language of our leaders, or even in our news media, that we're trying to save people rather than, and we talk about saving the NHS here, right? Well, that's an institution as well. Why are we not talking about saving people and using the economy to protect us? So there's a lovely line from Donut Economics, which is that the function of an economy is to create a safe and just space for humanity. There's no words GDP or growth in that. It's safe and just space for humanity. If you accept that, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals do, which all of our leaders say they sign up to, and most of the large companies in the world say they've signed up to, if you accept that that's the truth, that begs big questions about how you as a government operate, and how you as a company operate, and filters down to how you as an individual operate. What's my role in an economy? My role is to help create a safe and just space for humanity, same as the companies, same as the government. So I'm not seeing that yet. I'll be honest.
And I love how you immediately said "not yet," because it's very accurate in that those two words, "not yet." The question that keeps me up at night very openly is, is COVID enough, or are we going to have to see something much more devastating for some of this to really sink through? All too sadly.
Yeah, well, I can't remember who did the work, but basically any change doesn't happen without a crisis. And, the big crises have driven extraordinary social change. If you think of the world wars, just transformed our societies. COVID doesn't feel like it's a societally transforming event. Maybe it combined. It's a leading indicator of the big change that's required, and it's one of the things in the system that we'd expect to come out. So I don't know if you've seen David Attenborough's piece on his witness statement on Netflix. So for those not familiar with David Attenborough, he is a national treasure in the UK. He's about 90. And he's lived a life supporting the environment one way or another, TV presenter. And his piece has a really stark warning about that we're 10 years out from some not going back damage being caused to the Amazon, and the impact of that on farmland around the world, creating dust bowls and really creating the kind of crisis that we would like to avoid, but I think is possibly the one that will drive that change. The UN is talking about this being the decisive decade. This is perhaps COVID-19 and 2020 will be remembered as the moment we started to wake up, rather than the moment we transformed. But we must transform by the end of the decade, and this is a leading indicator that big one is coming.
Yeah, merely the trigger, exactly to that point. By no stretch have we transformed, exactly as you're saying. You know, especially with the work that we've been doing with the 3 events that we've had and moving forward. I mean, you've been pivotal, very honestly, since the first event, and your voice in the conversation. And the only, I don't want to occupy all the time, and I want to turn it back to Todd and appreciate your time, likewise, David. But I'm very thankful, very openly, and there's many people very thankful that leaders such as yourself and really are standing forward and sharing your wisdom, because it is what's needed, especially at this time and as we move forward. So deep gratitude for that.
Thank you, sir. Well, you're the man who brings us together, so thank you.
I appreciate that. And you know how fondly I feel about you. So many years when I stumbled upon your work, and all crucial, very, very crucial. So deep gratitude.
Thank you.
David, we've been going about 40 minutes or so right now. Is there something you're working on right now, or kind of a project that's got you excited, or some things that are kind of on your mind that we haven't had a chance to talk about so far?
Well, I think we touched on really the sustainability work that I've been working on a little with friends. It's a side project. In fact, the group that I'm working on, it meets again this evening. Really interesting group of people, some of whom we've actually accrued during lockdown along the way. So there's guys that have been in digital transformation consulting work, big businesses. But there are also, we have a neuroscientist, we have a guy who he used to negotiate on sustainable issues for the UK government. He's now the chief climate advisor to the World Wildlife Fund. Stumbled on him somehow. He's got involved. He's fantastic because he's heard a lot of it before. A lot of the kind of ideas that we might have, or the data sources we might want to look at, he's already been plugged into. Understand some of the challenges actually of making that visceral connect between, let's say, a carbon footprint number and a dolphin. And so that group have got agency folk in it. We've got people who, it's really one of those good diverse groups that's part of what part of its power is. It's not formal. There is no one looking to make any profit out of it. We're doing it as a social exercise. It started literally as a few of us having a beer together online because we couldn't go to the pub. And then you start talking, you start sharing concerns, and it starts shaping into something. And that's in many ways what we used to be able to do with the web, Tom. It's what we did in the first place with blogs, and people would comment on each other's blogs, and people would link to each other's pieces on blogs. And it was that openness and generosity that we had that now we find we have to go off and sort out a Zoom conference for because the likes of Facebook, which had the opportunity to be this wonderful platform for creativity, have shut in favor of trying to convince you to buy something. I still feel that world has lost so much in terms of the value it could be creating,
it's
even
cynical,
for the people.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's cynical. It's a lack of courage on their part.
Yeah, driven by the VCs in the first place, because the VCs didn't understand any other model other than how do you monetize, stick an advert on it. Obviously, that's a model we understand, and right. that did control a lot of the thinking. But now I do worry that we've got to a place because the greatest minds of a generation have been focused on trying to convince you to click something. and all the algorithms involved in that. That's got us to a place that's a little bit worrying, in that we could see that's US election coming up. The way it works, you only need a few thousand people in one or two places to vote in a certain way, and you've got a different president. And the UK, with its parliamentary system, is not a lot smarter. It's a similarly sort of easily gamed system. And right now we're in a place where we had all this kind of those very clever people at Cambridge Analytica are confusing the vote and watch out for the Russians, etc. No, it's just very simple kind of data manipulation and next best action techniques. The problem is it was distributed unevenly. So it didn't reach. If everyone was playing it, then you'd be able to identify it. But there's now a real need to counter that kind of fake news narrative, and it comes full circle with the requirement for us all to, at some point, if it works, accept a vaccination for COVID-19 if we want to be social human beings again, which I think is fundamentally what we are. So that we need to get back to that bit of our lives. But there is so much disinformation out there that people you might regard as relatively smart are easily convinced by one pocket of scientific validation, when science is actually about a body of work and cross-validation by many, many different parties in order to get a shared version of the truth. The web, in that respect, and particularly in the way some of the social media works in terms of the algorithms and what it will be shared with you, is heavily skewed to delivering bad information. And it doesn't care whether it's true or not either. Well, I was trained as a journalist. When we published an advertisement or an advertisement feature, we used to have to write across the top of it that was what it was, so that people would be clear that it wasn't some news, some unbiased attempt to convince. And we don't have that at all with the web. And that's a worry.
And I remember in some of my early undergraduate classes in mass media studies, the conversations about sort of silver bullet theory of public relations, that you could convince people, that black is white, up is down, but that doesn't really exist, because how could there be that many channels that would that people could just dwell in and live in forever and really believe this false reality that's there? We're there, and it's frightening and chilling the ways that people can just live in a world of conspiracy theories.
I wonder whether there is an education about it. I think kids are brought up to, in schools, they're taught to question, and they're taught to want more than one source and to cross-validate. And maybe as we become adults, we believe our own kind of version of the truth too much and stop querying and stop thinking we might be wrong, and therefore we we see the echo chamber effect of I must be right because everyone around me is saying the same thing, funnily enough, because that's how the algorithm works. And so I can understand why people convince themselves and are happy to be convinced of a truth that they already believe. The tougher bit is the mind-changing piece. It's always a tough question to ask someone. When did you last change your mind? It's hard. I struggle with that too.
I think we all do, and I think that's healthy for us to struggle. So, David, thank you so much for joining us, for spending some time with Sai and myself today. If somebody wants to read more of your day-to-day writing and thoughts, you keep a blog, correct?
I do. The blog is a complicatedly named Faster Future. No, I'll get it right. fasterfuture.blogspot.com. So it's one of the old blogger blogs that hasn't changed. I've never felt any need to. But you'll also find me on LinkedIn. I publish a lot of articles on there. and LinkedIn and my blog both include my email address and contact stuff. I don't live in fear of that, so feel free to connect. Happy to hear from people, particularly if they've got ideas and questions. That's what I love for.
All right.
I was going to say, do not miss David Cushman by every I mean, all around. So yeah, I highly, encourage people to find the gentleman and stay connected and just read what he puts out there. I mean, just literally, you're at the top of my list every morning, David. I'll put it that way. What you've written. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you. It's always a joy to talk with some like minds. Hopefully we can persuade a few others to join the fun. And I still believe there's more good in this internet of ours than there is bad, and we will prevail.
That's a great message to leave it on. Thank you, David Cushman. This has been Catalyzing the Future broadcast of Catalyzing Conversations. You can catch us on YouTube and Facebook. And if you haven't already, please like, comment, and share on this conversation. We would love to hear from you and to keep the conversation going in a truly asynchronous fashion. So that's it for this broadcast, and we hope to see you again soon.